Have you ever seen a man who could design skyscrapers, but chose instead to build a life out of love? This is the story of a brilliant architect, raised in the humblest of tailor shops, who rose to fame not by chasing fortune, but by following something far rarer. Beauty with meaning. He had everything: talent, success, respect. But it wasn't until he stepped into a small sewing shop on a quiet street and met a woman with calloused fingers and a wounded heart. His real story began. A child called her mommy. He thought it meant she belonged to someone else. He was wrong. Before we begin this unforgettable journey of quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of love that stitches people back together, make sure to subscribe to Heartlight Stories, so you never miss the tales that move you most. Now, take a breath and step into the story. It was the kind of town you'd pass through without noticing, just another speck on the Ohio map, where the train only stopped if someone flagged it down and the wind carried the scent of sawdust and stitched cotton. But if you asked anyone who grew up there, they'd tell you about one boy who saw something more. Not just faded storefronts or sagging porches. He saw angles, saw light, saw possibility. Graham Lark was only 10 when he began measuring everything. The doorframe of his family's little tailor shop, the slope of the roof tiles, the width of the church pews. He'd walk around with a frayed yellow measuring tape clipped to his belt like a sheriff's badge, stopping every few steps to jot something down in the brown paper notebook he carried everywhere. His father, Marvin, used to laugh and say, "We raise a tailor, not a builder's son." But his mother, hand stained with chalk and a pincushion strapped to her wrist, would just smile as she hemmed another suit and whisper, "Let him dream. The world needs builders too." The tailor shop itself was humble, barely wider than a boxcar, with a bell over the door that chimed a single tired note each time it opened. But to Graham, it was a cathedral. The bolts of fabric stacked like stained glass windows, the squeaky pedal of the old sewing machine music, and the large window at the front where sunlight spilled in just right after 3 p.m., that was his gallery, where he'd sit cross-legged on the floor, sketching buildings with fantastical domes and bridges that danced across rivers like lace. He wasn't like the other boys who raced their bikes down dirt alleys or traded baseball cards on the school steps. Graham had a tenderness about him, a kind of quiet intensity. He spoke softly, listened deeply, and once spent an entire weekend drawing redesigned storefronts for every business in town just because, as he told the hardware store owner, people walk in differently when the building welcomes them. It wasn't easy being different. The other kids teased him. Lark the Line Boy, they called him, building castles in cornfields. But Graham never lashed out. He just kept drawing, kept measuring, kept seeing a world others didn't. One autumn afternoon, something happened that would change everything. Mrs. Whitcomb, the town librarian, had posted a faded notice near the school: "Free weekend design class for creative young minds. No experience needed." Graham's heart pounded. The moment he read it, he tore the paper from the board like it was a treasure map and sprinted all the way home, waving it in the air. "They're holding a class, Ma, about drawing buildings and space and form, and I can go. It's free." His mother looked over the flyer with a frown that Graham couldn't quite read. "Saturday's laundry day," she said, placing another shirt into the wash basin. "And we've got Mr. Kessler's suit to finish by Monday." "But it's only a few hours," Graham pleaded. "Please, just this once." She hesitated. Then, with a sigh and a smile that reached her eyes, she pulled out a clean shirt and pressed it against his chest. "Then you'll go looking sharp. We don't show up to our future in wrinkled sleeves." That Saturday, Graham walked into the old town hall, a place he'd never dared enter before, and found a dozen kids seated at long wooden tables covered in drafting paper and rulers. At the front stood a man with silver hair and spectacles that magnified his eyes like glass marbles. His name was Mr. Delaney, a retired architect from Cincinnati who had moved to the countryside to slow down and give back. For 2 hours, Mr. Delaney spoke of beauty in lines and balance in design, of how every window, every step, every curve in a structure could shape how a person felt when they walked through it. "Architecture," he said, tapping the board with his chalk, "isn't just about buildings. It's about people. It's about emotion. It's about soul. Graham sat on the edge of his seat, scribbling notes so quickly his hand cramped. When Mr. Delaney passed by his drawing, a small wooden library shaped like an open book, he paused. "You drew this?" the man asked. Graham nodded, heart pounding. Double quotes, "Son, you see like a builder, not of walls, of wonder." That night, Graham couldn't sleep. He stared up at the cracked ceiling of his bedroom, tracing imaginary beams and arches with his fingers, already planning a new sketch by sunrise. Something had shifted inside him, a knowing. He didn't have money, didn't have connections, but he had something more powerful: belief, and an unshakable sense that beauty could change the way people walked through the world, just like it changed how a boy walked through a town too small for his dreams. 15 years later, the measuring tape was still in Graham Lark's pocket, only now it was laser-guided, etched with precision, and clipped to the belt of one of the youngest architecture graduates ever honored by the American Institute of Architects. He was 25 when he walked onto the stage of the Westvale Auditorium to receive his final award as valedictorian. His mother sat in the front row, hands trembling in her lap, the hem of her handmade dress slightly uneven. She had insisted on wearing something she stitched herself. "So you remember where you come from," she'd whispered. Graham had kissed her cheek and said, "I never forgot." The applause that followed his name was thunderous, but what echoed loudest in his mind was the creak of the floorboards in his father's old shop, the rustle of bolts of fabric, and the scratch of pencil on brown paper. He didn't see himself as the star of the moment, saw himself as the bridge between two worlds, thread and steel, hand-stitched patience and concrete resolve. Instead of joining a prestigious firm after graduation, Graham shocked his professors and classmates by starting his own design studio, Lark Foreman, a modest, converted firehouse in Cincinnati. The walls still smelled of smoke and engine grease, but he loved it. It was raw, unfinished, full of potential. Just like him, his first projects were humble: a community garden pavilion, daycare center for low-income families, a renovation of a crumbling youth center. But there was something in every line he drew, something that made people feel like they were being seen, not as clients, but as humans. Every building had curves where there could have been corners, light where most saw only utility, hope where others saw budget cuts. By 29, he had already been featured in Architectural Digest. By 31, he was being courted by investors. But Graham wasn't interested in skyscrapers that pierced clouds or marble lobbies echoing with ego. He wanted schools with color, hospitals with warmth, libraries with grace. He believed deeply that architecture was the silent shepherd of the human spirit, and he dressed like he believed it. Graham Lark had a signature look-through-piece suits, tailored to perfection, with hand-stitched details so subtle they were almost secrets. Every button chosen, every pocket placed, every collar fold deliberate. When asked about his style in an interview, he smiled and said, "I grew up surrounded by fabric. My mother taught me that how you present yourself is a kind of architecture, too." It was at one of these high-profile interviews during a design symposium for urban revitalization that Graham made waves, not with blueprints, but with a story. On stage before hundreds of investors and civic leaders, he pulled out a small sketchbook. It was worn, held together with a rubber band. "I want to show you the first building I ever drew," he said, flipping it open. "This is a library. I drew it when I was 10. It has a reading garden, sun-warmed benches, and windows shaped like open books." There were chuckles, murmurs. Then he looked up. "Everyone in this room has the power to build something lasting, not just in stone, but in memory. Because the child who reads in that library today will design the world tomorrow. And what they feel in that space, the joy, the safety, the welcome that becomes their blueprint for life." Silence. Then thunderous applause. That day, Lark Form secured a public-private partnership worth $12 million to design a new network of neighborhood libraries across the state, modern, inclusive, full of light. But despite his growing success, Graham remained deeply rooted in small rituals. Every Monday, he called his mother to describe the most beautiful building he saw that week. Every first Friday, he donated suits to a local Job center reach, one tailored, with a handwritten card tucked in the pocket. Confidence is built one seam at a time. Yet something lingered beneath the polished surface of his days. Despite being surrounded by admirers, Graham remained single. He'd had 2 long-term relationships, both with women in the same industry, intelligent, aesthetically, brilliant. But something was always missing. Not respect, not affection, but depth. Graham longed for a connection that wasn't curated. He didn't want someone to understand his portfolio. He wanted someone who would understand the boy who once measured windows with trembling fingers and believed beauty could save people. And so he waited until one afternoon. In early spring, while walking through a quieter neighborhood in search of a tailor who specialized in heritage techniques, he saw a storefront that made him stop. The window was modest, no neon signs, no displays. It's just a mannequin in a simple linen dress, hand-embroidered at the hem. Sunlight caught on the thread like it was golden wire. Above the door, a weathered wooden sign read, "Stitch and Hearth." His breath caught. There was something hauntingly familiar about the place. The smell of pressed cotton, the warm glow from within, the quiet dignity in the way the window had been dressed not to sell, but to welcome. Graham stepped inside. The bell above the door gave a soft ding, not tired, like the one from his childhood, but clear, deliberate. And then he saw her. She was adjusting a sleeve on a client in the back of the room. Laughing gently, auburn hair pinned loosely at her neck. There was a child no older than 3 playing with fabric scraps near her feet. Singing a song only children know how to sing. Graham didn't breathe. He didn't even move. Because in that moment, he wasn't an award-winning architect or a rising star. He was a boy again, standing in a room where beauty wasn't performed. It was lived, and something in him whispered, "This is what you've been building toward." The air inside Stitch and Hearth was warm and fragrant, laced with the scent of lavender sachets tucked into fabric drawers and the faint citrus oil used to clean the vintage wooden floors. A small ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, creaking now, and then like an old friend clearing its throat. There was no music playing. It's just the quiet rhythm of scissors gliding, the hum of an iron in the background, and a child's lilting laughter winding between it all like thread through a needle. Graham stood near the entrance longer than he realized, his hand resting on the antique coat rack by the door, as if unsure whether he'd entered a store. Wandered into a memory. The woman looked up mid-laugh, catching sight of him. Her smile paused but didn't vanish. She was striking, but not in the way models were. There was something real about her beauty, something lived in, like she had weathered storms and somehow become softer, not harder, because of them. "B. Right with you?" she called, her voice warm with a faint rasp that made it seem as though she spoke in lowercase. She gave a final pin to the sleeve of her client's dress, exchanged a few quiet words, then turned her attention to Graham. As she approached, Graham noticed the gentle calluses on her fingers, the faint freckles on her arms, the specks of blue chalk near her elbow. She wore a navy wrap dress with a pencil tucked behind one ear, and her apron bore the faint outlines of 100 projects. "Welcome," she said, offering a smile that reached her eyes. "Looking for something tailored or something to remember?" "Someone buy?" It was such an unexpected question that he blinked. Actually. Maybe both," Graham replied, startled by his own honesty. Her smile widened, just slightly. "That's usually how it goes." He introduced himself. She offered her name in return. Her handshake was firm, but not forced. Everything about her felt grounded. Graham explained he'd been searching for a tailor who still practiced hand-finishing techniques, someone who didn't just adjust seams but understood the architecture of garments. As he spoke, Alina listened, without interrupting. Eyes attentive, but never too intense. "You speak of clothes the way most people speak of buildings," she said, tilting her head. Graham chuckled. "Maybe that's because I see them the same way." Alina gestured toward a small sitting area near the window. "Why don't you take a seat? I'll bring out some fabric books." As she turned to go, the little girl who had been playing earlier toddled over, clutching a swatch of velvet in one hand and dragging a plush rabbit in the other. She had the same warm auburn hair as Alina, the same eyes shaped like commas. "Mommy," she said, tugging at her mother's dress. "He has shiny shoes." Alina crouched to her daughter's level, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. Doesn't he? Maybe they're magic." The girl giggled, then looked at Graham and asked, "Are you a prince?" He smiled. "Only in fairy tales, I'm afraid." "She's Isla," Alina said, standing. "And she tends to ask very big questions of very new people. You've been warned." "She's perfect," Graham replied softly. "Don't let her change." Shadow crossed Elena's face for the briefest of moments, a flicker of something unspoken. Then she smiled again and handed Isla a soft measuring tape to play with. Over the next hour, Graham looked through dozens of fabrics. They discussed drape and sheen, texture and contrast, but the conversation drifted naturally into less professional territory. He learned that Alina had opened the shop 4 years earlier after inheriting it from her grandmother. Modernized it, yes, but kept most of the original fixtures. The old oak counter, the display window, even the bell above the door. It didn't feel right to change too much, she said. Some places aren't just rooms. They're memory holders. Graham understood that better than she knew. He wanted to ask more. About Isla. About the faint sadness that sometimes flickered in Elena's gaze when she thought no one noticed. But he'd instead commissioned 2 pieces of vests and a charcoal gray jacket, tasking for hand-stitched buttonholes and contrast lining in a deep indigo. Like twilight, he'd said. As she took his measurements, he found himself studying the small details, the quiet way she moved, how her hands hesitated a fraction before touching his shoulder, as if remembering what boundaries meant. He admired her restraint. It made him trust her even more. "Are you always this careful?" he asked quietly. She paused. "Only with people who matter." That answer sat with him long after he left the shop, as he stepped out into the afternoon. Sun. A strange sensation settled in his chest. Not longing, not excitement. Something gentler. Something deeper. Recognition, maybe. But as he reached his car and looked back through the window one last time, saw Isla climb into Elena's lap, wrapping her arms around her neck. Elena kissed her temple, whispered something that made the girl giggle again. And Graham's heart quietly dropped. She's married, he thought. Of course she is. A woman like that, whole, luminous, quietly extraordinary she must be. The thought stung more than it should have. He hadn't even known her an hour, and yet he slid into the driver's seat and stared ahead, gripping the wheel. What had he been thinking? He wasn't that boy anymore, dreaming from behind a fabric counter. He was a man with a schedule, a company, responsibilities. This wasn't a movie. He couldn't just fall for someone because of a moment in a sunlit shop. "Still," he whispered. Aloud as he started the engine, she felt like home. And as he pulled away from Stitch and Hearth, Graham promised himself it was a one-time visit. He didn't know then he was wrong. 2 weeks passed. Graham told himself he was too busy to return. That the design review for the Midtown Art School took precedence. That the conference in Chicago would demand his focus. That his calendar, which had never failed to ground him before, would now guard him from something far more dangerous than deadlines: curiosity. But each time he opened his closet and saw the empty hanger he had saved for the twilight jacket Alina was crafting, he felt it, that quiet pull. The one that didn't hum like ambition or urgency. The one that whispered, "You left something unfinished, and it wasn't just fabric." Still he resisted. Until a Tuesday evening, during a gala for urban design innovators, his resolve quietly unraveled. He wasn't supposed to speak that night. But when the keynote presenter canceled, the organizers asked Graham to fill in. He stepped up without hesitation, delivering a heartfelt presentation on community-centered architecture. The crowd was warm, the energy uplifting. He should have felt elated. Instead, as he scanned the room from the stage, he caught sight of her. Alina, she stood near the back, not in a gown like the others, but in a slate blue dress with three-quarter sleeves and a belt cinched with a vintage clasp. Her hair was pinned in soft waves, her posture poised, yet unassuming. She wasn't there for spectacle, she was simply there. And suddenly, Graham's whole body remembered why he couldn't forget her. She hadn't seen him yet. He waited until the applause faded, until the lights softened, and then made his way through the mingling crowd. Alina? She turned, startled, but then smiled, genuinely surprised, but not displeased. Graham Lark, she said with a little laugh. I wasn't expecting to see you here. It makes two of us, he replied. Are you involved in this event? She nodded. A few of my clients are donors. They invited me. One of them needed a last-minute repair to a zipper. So, she shrugged, half apologetic. Tailors sometimes make the red carpet happen just behind the scenes. Look more like the reason for it. No. The words slipped out before he could filter them, but Alina didn't flinch. Her smile softened instead, and for a moment, the noise around them dulled. I picked up your order this morning, she said, changing the subject gently. It's nearly finished. Just needs the final stitching on the lining. Come to check on the jacket, I know, she said. They stared at each other a beat too long. Do you have a minute? Graham asked. Somewhere quieter. She hesitated, but then nodded. Let me just check on Isla. They stepped outside. Into the evening air, where the soft hush of city lights replaced the gala's glamour. Alina pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. She's with my neighbor, she explained. Safe, painting butterflies, apparently. Graham leaned against a railing, arms folded loosely. I owe you an apology. For what? Assuming things, I saw Isla call you mom and just assumed there was a dad at home, and I walked away without asking, without giving you the respect of the truth. Lena tilted her head, studying him. And now I want to understand? For a long time, she said nothing. Just looked out over the city skyline, eyes reflecting a quiet calculation of trust. Then, softly, she began. I was married, she said, young, to a man who knew how to dazzle. Wealthy, charming, persuasive. He swept me into his world so quickly I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until it was too late. Graham didn't interrupt. We had Isla about 2 years in. She was the light of my life and the end of our marriage. Said fatherhood wasn't what he pictured, that I had changed, that the weight of real life was too much. A pause. He left when Isla was 9 months old, moved out west with someone else. Someone who didn't ask him to wake up in the middle of the night or give up golf for diaper duty. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I kept the shop, sold my ring, moved into a smaller apartment, started over. I'm sorry, Graham said quietly. I'm not, she replied, more firmly than he expected. Not anymore. He gave me the greatest gift of my life, Fila, and he taught me how strong I am. They stood in silence for a while, watching a streetcar glide past below them. A breeze lifted the edges of her dress. Graham turned to her. You've done everything. Alone? She shrugged. Not entirely. I have friends, kind neighbors, clients who became family. But yes, the hardest parts? Those were mine. And now? Alina looked at him, really looked at him. I'm not looking to be rescued, Graham. I know. I don't need someone to come in and fix things. Know that too. Then why are you here? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice low and certain. Because I saw you. Before I knew any of this. I saw how you moved through space, how you held yourself, how you looked at Isla, and I knew I was looking at something rare. A heartbeat passed. You reminded me of home, he added. But not the home I grew up in, the one I've been trying to build my whole life. Elena's breath caught. Light flickered behind her eyes, like the cautious striking of a match. But then she stepped back. I don't know if I can go through all that again, she whispered. Not with someone like you. Someone like me. Someone with ambition. With a future that's already paved. My life is messy, complicated, small. He smiled gently. You're wrong. It's built. It's stitched. It's earned. And it's beautiful. A long silence stretched between them, neither reaching nor retreating. Just standing in the quiet space between what had been and what might become. Finally, Lena said, the jacket will be ready Friday. Graham nodded. Then I'll be there for the jacket, and maybe something more. As she turned to go, her voice drifted back over her shoulder. We'll see. Friday came with a sky the color of linen pale, soft and stretched wide above the rooftops of Cincinnati. Graham arrived at Stitch and Hearth precisely at 10 a.m., as promised, wearing a slate blue shirt and no tie. It was the first time in years he hadn't worn a blazer to a business meeting, and somehow it felt more formal than anything in his closet. The bell chimed as he stepped inside. The scent of warm steam and pressed wool welcomed him like an old friend. Elena looked up. From behind the counter, where she was stitching the final hem of a jacket sleeve, his jacket. Her hair was half up, soft tendrils falling around her face. There were threads clinging to her apron, a pencil tucked behind her ear, and something in her expression that seemed calmer than the last time they met, but still guarded. Right. On time, she said. I try to be reliable, Graham replied with a small smile. She nodded toward the dressing mirror. Go ahead. It's ready. The jacket was draped on a vintage mannequin beside the window. It looked like it belonged in a museum. Classic lines, hand-stitched lapels. The rich twilight-colored lining peeking through ever so slightly. He slid it on. It fit like it had always belonged to him. When he turned toward the mirror, something shifted in his posture, stood straighter. Yes, but more than that, he looked anchored. As if wearing that jacket grounded him in a version of himself he hadn't met yet, but had always hoped existed. It's perfect, he murmured. Elena smiled but said nothing. Isla ran out from the back just then, wearing a tutu over her leggings and a paper crown tilted on her head. Are you a king now? She asked, pointing at the jacket. Graham crouched down, grinning. Only if you'll be my princess. She twirled in approval. Do you want to see the secret pockets? He asked, opening the inner flap of the jacket. To show the indigo stitching, her eyes lit up. Can I put my jelly beans in there? Only if you promise to share. Lena watched them with folded arms and a flicker of something in her gaze. Graham couldn't quite name something between awe and caution. Would you have lunch with us today? He asked, standing. Both of you? Just down the street? There's a place with a garden and a lemonade Isla would probably love. She hesitated. Graham, not rushing, he said quickly. Just offering. Elena glanced at her daughter, who was now pretending to measure Graham's shoes with a ribbon. She let out a soft laugh and nodded. All right, I picked the table. They walked the few blocks to a small cafe, with iron garden chairs and vines crawling along the fence. Ala insisted on sitting between them, and spent the meal telling Graham all about her favorite crayons, her imaginary friend named Button, and why she believed clouds were made of powdered sugar. Graham listened with the kind of attention most adults reserve for boardrooms and contracts. He answered every question, even the strange ones, and when Isla accidentally dropped her grilled cheese, he offered half of his sandwich without blinking. Elena watched, quietly, thoughtfully. After lunch, they strolled toward the nearby park. The cherry blossoms were just starting to bloom, petals drifting like confetti across the sidewalk. Ela ran ahead, chasing shadows. Lena slowed her steps. You're very good with her, she said. I like kids, Graham replied. No, you. Respect her. That's different. He glanced at her. I don't think children are small versions of people. I think they're the most honest versions. They just haven't been taught to hide it yet. So he considered that, then added, her father never once took her to the park. I would have, Graham said without thinking, and caught himself. I mean, I would. Elena smiled, not offended. Not surprised, they found a bench near a flowering tree. Isla busied herself nearby with a twig and a patch of dandelions. "I've been cautious," Lena said softly, not looking at him. "I know. I've seen what happens when someone makes promises they don't plan to keep. I've watched hope rot from the inside. I've rebuilt my life brick by brick. And I did it without expecting anyone to walk in and hold the last piece for me." Graham leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I'm not here to hold the last piece. I'm here to hold the blueprint with you if you'll let me." She turned to him then, searching his face for any trace of insincerity. She found none. "And if I say I still don't know what I want, then I'll wait," he said. "As long as I know you're not closing the door." A long moment passed between them, still quiet. It's full of something unspoken but alive then. Isla came trotting over with a dandelion crown. "I made it for Mommy, but it's too big. Maybe you can wear it." Graham took it solemnly and placed it on his head. "How do I look?" "Like a very silly prince," Isla declared. He grinned. "Perfect." Elena laughed, not the polite kind, a full unguarded laugh that startled even her. And just like that, the distance between them shrank only by a step. Graham hadn't been nervous in years. He'd pitched multi-million-dollar projects to state senators, debated zoning codes with developers 3 times his age, once calmed an entire boardroom during a system crash minutes before a live design reveal. But tonight, as he stood in front of his parents' stately brick home in the quiet, old money neighborhood where he grew up, his palms were damp and his breath came just a little too quick. He glanced sideways at Alina, who stood beside him in a soft gray dress and navy cardigan. Her expression was unreadable, but cautious. Ela clutched his other hand. Dressed in her Sunday best and carrying a small bouquet of dandelions, she insisted, were fancy enough for a grandma. "Ready?" he asked. Alina gave a tight smile. "I've survived worse." He wished she hadn't had to. He rang the bell. It echoed like a gavel through the columns of the front porch. His mother, Margot Lark, opened the door a moment later. She wore her usual pearls and pressed blouse, her gray hair swept into a perfect twist. Her eyes flicked first to Graham, then to Alina, and finally, with a barely visible pause, to Isla. "Well," she said, "you're on time." "Hi, Mom," Graham said, bending to kiss her cheek. She accepted it stiffly. "This is Alina, and this," he crouched, "is Isla." Isla held out her flowers. "These are for you." Margot hesitated, then took them with a forced smile. How thoughtful. They stepped inside. The air smelled like lemon-polished wood and quiet judgment. Dinner was already laid out in the formal dining room: roast chicken, asparagus, glazed carrots, and something gelatinous that jiggled ominously. Graham's father, George, was already seated, sipping from a glass of scotch, his expression unreadable behind round glasses and decades of Midwestern stoicism. Introductions were brief. Conversation. Margot spoke of her garden. George mentioned rising property taxes. Alina answered politely but sparingly. Isla tried to reach for a bread roll and knocked over a water glass. The silence that followed rang louder than the crash. "I'm so sorry," Alina said quickly, dabbing at the linen tablecloth. "It's just water," Graham said, helping Margot's lips thinned. "Perhaps next time we use the kitchen table." Alina said nothing. Graham's jaw tightened. Halfway through the meal, the storm broke. Margot said, placing her fork down, "You're a seamstress." Alina nodded. "Yes, I run a small shop downtown, Stitch and Hearth. Specialize in hand-finished garments, heirloom tailoring, restoration." How quaint. Margot interrupted, then turned to Graham. "And how exactly do you see this fitting into your future? You're leading one of the most promising architecture firms in the state, and now you're—" "What? Playing house?" George cleared his throat. "Margot, no," she said, her voice rising slightly. "This is not a matter of opinion. This is about reputation, about trajectory. Graham, we've supported you since day one. Made sacrifices. Now you show up with a woman we've never met, with a child who's—" "Stop," Graham said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. He looked at his mother, really looked at her hand, saw the fear behind the control, the pride behind the coldness. But he didn't flinch. Alina isn't someone I'm dating casually. She's someone I respect, someone I admire. Neela is her daughter. Yes, but tonight, she is your guest. You will treat her as such. Margot's face reddened. Don't understand what you're walking into. Single mothers don't come without complications, Graham. They come with burdens, with messes, with needs. Then maybe it's time we redefined what qualifies as a burden? He stood. You taught me to chase excellence, but you never said it had to look a certain way. You taught me to build a strong foundation, as he gestured to. Alina and Isla is mine. For a long, aching moment, no one moved. Then Isla whispered, Can we go now? Graham reached down and scooped her into his arms. Yes, sweetheart, we can. Alina stood, silent but dignified, and followed him toward the door. Just before they reached it, Graham turned back. I love you both, he said. But I won't abandon the people who make me feel more human, just to make you comfortable. Then, he walked out. Outside, the air was crisp. Stars were beginning to break through the dusk. Alina walked a few steps ahead, clutching her purse like a shield. Graham caught up to her, Isla still in his arms. I'm sorry, he said. You. Shouldn't be, she replied. He stopped walking. I meant what I said in there. Lena looked up at him, eyes glistening but not with shame, with strength. I know, she said. That's what scares me. He reached out, touching her hand. You don't have to be afraid. Not alone anymore. She exhaled shakily. No, I'm not. That night, Graham didn't return to his condo. He drove Alina and Isla home, carried the sleepy girl to her bed, and stood in the doorway as Alina tucked her in. The house was quiet, modest, lived dashing. He looked around at the mismatched picture frames, the hand-painted growth chart on the wall, the laundry basket in the hallway, and for the first time in years, he felt completely at ease. Alina walked out of Isla's room and found him leaning against the hallway wall, jacket off, tie undone. You okay? She asked. He nodded. More than okay. She studied him for a long moment. Then softly, she said, Stay. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't impulsive. It was a word soaked in something deeper. Trust and Graham Lark. Once the boy with a measuring tape stepped across a threshold he hadn't dared dream of into, a life built not with blueprints or budgets, but with love. The house sat at the edge of a quiet street lined with sugar maples, their spring leaves fluttering like soft applause in the breeze. It wasn't grand, it wasn't new, but it had charmed the kind born from years of whispered bedtime stories, hand-med-down recipes, and love stitched into the curtains. Graham moved in quietly, without fanfare or boxes piled high. One day, his suitcase appeared in the corner of Elena's bedroom. The next, his shaving kit in the bathroom. Then his books on the living room shelf, his framed childhood sketch of a library above the fireplace. And finally, a small blue stool, Isla declared, was his official pancake seat. It wasn't about claiming space, it was about joining it. The house had 5 windows, one in each bedroom, one in the living room, and the 5th, Graham's favorite, above the kitchen sink. Every morning, he stood there with his coffee, watching the sun light up the backyard, where Isla chased squirrels or played tea party with invisible friends. On Saturdays, Alina baked cinnamon bread, and the scent drifted out through the screens. As if inviting the neighborhood to start slow and stay gentle, Graham made small renovations, nothing grand. He replaced creaky floorboards, repainted the walls in soft, earthy tones, added dimmable lighting in the hallway. He designed a reading nook in the corner of the living room with built-in shelves and a window seat that Isla quickly turned into her storytelling throne. Why don't you ever build big things here? She asked one day, watching him draw on a yellow legal pad. Because the most important buildings, he said, tapping her nose, aren't always tall. Sometimes they're small and full of heart. Alina, watching from the kitchen, smiled. Quietly, she had heard countless declarations of love in her life. Some extravagant, but nothing reached her like the way Graham made their ordinary feel holy. They built routines that felt like rituals. Sunday mornings were for blueberry pancakes and jazz on vinyl. Tuesday nights meant story time, with Isla choosing a book and Graham doing the voices. Friday evenings were 4 grocery runs, turned dance parties in the produce aisle, and on one particular Thursday warm, golden. With fireflies starting to blink between fence posts, Graham brought home a sketchbook. "I have something for you," he told Alina, placing it on the dining table. She opened it and blinked. Inside were pages of architectural drawings, floor plans, elevations, cross-sections all of her house. But not as it was, as it could be. "You redesigned my home?" she asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. "I reimagined it," he corrected. "Only with your permission." She flipped through. It's the same footprint, but enhanced. It's a sunroom off the back where her sewing table would face the garden, a skylight in the hallway. Extra insulation in the nursery just in case. You even included the paint chipping on the front porch, she whispered. "Authenticity matters." Alina touched the page like it was sacred. "This is beautiful." "It's just the beginning," he said softly. Later that night, after Isla had fallen asleep, curled around her stuffed rabbit, Graham and Alina sat on the back steps under a navy sky pricked with stars. "I always dreamed of a house like this," he said. "It's not because it's big, but because it feels alive. Your home has soul, Alina. It breathes." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I always dreamed of someone who saw things that way." They sat there in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Then Graham reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. "I know it's soon," he said, "but when you know, you know. I've known from the moment you opened your front door and let me in, really let me in. I want to build a life with you, not around you. With you." Elena's breath caught as he opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a single sapphire set. In a band of rose gold. No diamond, no extravagance. It's just depth and warmth and light. She didn't answer right away. She looked at him, really looked. Then she looked at the house, the garden. It's the window above the kitchen sink. And she nodded. Double quotes. Yes. There were. No tears, no shouts of joy, just a quiet certainty. Sacred yes. The next morning, Lena placed the ring in a small dish by the sink as she kneaded bread, Isla beside her covered in flour. Graham installed new hooks in the hallway for Isla's coat and backpacked to his own. They were a family now, not by ceremony, not yet by law, but by choice, by presence, by thousands of tiny acts of belonging, and the house. The house, it bloomed with them. One evening, as a summer storm rolled in, Graham stood at the 5th window, watching lightning dance across the sky. Elena joined him, sliding her hand into his. "Do you miss your old life?" He thought for a moment. "I miss the silence of being alone," he admitted. "But I'd never trade it for the music of being here." She rested, her head against him. Good answer. They stood there until the rain fell in earnest, tapping on the glass like applause. Autumn arrived like a cycle, crisp and unhurried. The sugar maples lining the street outside Graham and Elena's home had turned amber and crimson, their leaves drifting down like blessings on the neighborhood's sidewalks. Inside the house, cinnamon lingered in the air from morning muffins, and Isla had begun naming the pumpkins on the porch. "This one's Walter, that one's Junebug." Graham's world was quiet, full, complete, but one thread remained untied. His parents hadn't spoken to him since the dinner that fractured everything. He'd sent updates. Photos of the reading nook he built with Isla. Handwritten invitations to the housewarming brunch. A voicemail letting them know he and Alina had set a date for spring. No response. At first, it didn't matter, or so he told himself. He had chosen the family he wanted, the life he believed in, but something tugged at him, especially in the quiet moments. The scent of his mother's perfume in a crowded elevator. A phrase his father used to say when sharpening a pencil. Echoing from his own mouth unbidden. You could love what you'd built and still ache. For the part of the blueprint you'd left behind, it was Isla who broke the silence. One chilly October morning, Graham found her seated at the kitchen table, tongue out in concentration, crayons scattered like candy around her. She was writing a letter in blocky, uneven letters. To Grandma and Grandpa, it read, "Please come to my birthday. I will be 5. We have cinnamon cake. I have a reading chair now, love. Isla." There was a dandelion drawing in the corner, and below that, a crooked heart. Graham knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, we're not sure they'll come." She looked at him with the kind of unwavering conviction only a child could carry. Maybe they forgot how to be nice. Can remind them. He folded the letter, kissed her forehead, and mailed it that afternoon. Days passed. No reply. Then, on the morning of Isla's birthday, as Alina tied balloons to the mailbox and Graham arranged cupcakes on the kitchen counter, as a silver sedan pulled up outside, Graham froze. His mother stepped out first. She wore her usual wool coat, but there was no necklace, no lipstick. Just a quietness about her, like someone walking into a memory they weren't sure they were welcome in. George followed, hands in his pockets, his usual sternness softened by something less defined. Alina met them at the gate. She didn't speak. Neither did they. Graham came up behind her, his hand slipping into hers. Then Isla burst through the front door, tutu over jeans, paper crown askew. She paused at the top of the steps, wide-eyed. "Grandma." Margot swallowed. "Yes, darling." "Came we did." Isla ran toward them, arms flung wide, and Margot bent slowly, uncertainly, then wrapped her arms around the little girl with a tenderness that surprised even herself. "Happy birthday," she whispered. George patted Isla's head, clearing his throat. "You've grown," he said, his voice gruff but kind. They entered the house like cautious guests, their eyes scanning the space Graham now called home. It was modest, but warm. Books stacked on end tables, a patchwork quilt on the couch, light work. Streaming through the 5th window, the party was small. Few friends, neighbors, and one tired magician hired from the community center. Graham kept an eye on his parents from across the room as they watched Isla open gifts and offer cupcakes like currency. Later, as guests began to trickle out, Graham found his mother standing in the kitchen, holding a paper plate and staring. At a family photo on the fridge, it was the 3 of them, him, Alina, last smiling beneath the cherry tree in the park. "I thought I lost you," she said, without turning. "You did," he replied. "But not forever." Margot looked at him then, eyes damp. "She's a wonderful woman. She is. I was scared," she admitted, "that you'd choose something small, something that wouldn't challenge you. I didn't see until. Now that this life is your biggest creation," he nodded, "you always wanted me to build something beautiful. This is it." She touched his hand. "Then I'm proud of you." George joined them, his voice low. "You've done good, son. She's got a quiet strength. I see that now." Graham didn't speak. He just nodded, his throat too thick for words. That night, the house had quieted, and the last balloon sagged above the dining room table. Graham and Alina sat together beneath the stars. Isla had fallen asleep mid-sentence on the couch, party hat still askew. "They came," Alina said softly. "They did. Are you all right?" He looked at her, the woman who had taught him what it meant to build with heart. "I think," he said slowly, "for the first time in a long time I am." She reached over, lacing her fingers through his. "We didn't need their approval." "No," he agreed. "But it feels good to be seen." Alina rested her head on his shoulder. "You were always seen, Graham. You just needed to be understood." He pressed a kiss to her hair and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For being the home I didn't know I was missing." Somewhere beyond the soft hum of the porch light, the last red leaf drifted down from the tree, as if the season itself had taken a deep breath and exhaled peace. The first morning of spring arrived not with a grand declaration, but with quiet clarity. A robin's call outside the window. The smell of damp soil and daffodils blooming beside the porch steps. In the kitchen, sunlight spilled across the table where Graham sat with Isla, now 6, helping her cut out shapes for a school art project. "Alina says you're good with buildings," Isla said, holding up a crayon drawing of a crooked thrush. Graham smiled. "Some people think so. Can you build this?" He studied her picture turrets, rope bridges, swing hanging from a cloud. I can try, he said. Isla nodded solemnly. It's okay if it's not perfect. Mommy says the best things are sometimes a little messy. That made him laugh. By now, the Lark household had grown noisier, busier, and somehow even more beautiful. Over the past 4 years, their family had expanded 4 children in total now. Isla, of course, followed by twin boys named Ezra and Rowan, and a quiet, observant girl they named May, and most recently a baby girl born just before Christmas, whose name Hope felt less like a choice and more like a prophecy. They had built a life in layers. Graham kept Larkform thriving, expanding it with care, not ego. He turned down skyscraper projects in exchange for public schools, neighborhood clinics, libraries in towns like the one he came from. He believed more than ever that architecture wasn't about reaching higher right, was about grounding deeper. His reputation only grew. One of his designs, a community center shaped like an open palm, was now taught in university classes. He was invited to speak at TED, honored by the AIA, featured on the cover of The Atlantic beside the headline, "The Architect of Soulful Spaces." But at home, he was just Dad. The one who made pancakes shaped like stars, the one who danced like a fool in the living room, the one who fixed squeaky doors and built birdhouses and could never quite say no to one more story. 2 had blossomed. Stitch and Hearth had become a local gem, known not just for fine tailoring, but for mentorship. She trained single mothers in the art of sewing, helping them build confidence and independence, stitch by stitch. Her photo had recently appeared in a city magazine under the title "Mending More Than Clothes." One afternoon, while Hope napped in a sunbeam and the twins drew with chalk on the sidewalk, Graham sat beside Alina on the front steps. "You know," said, "I thought success would feel bigger, flashier." She leaned against him, and now he watched May gently tuck flowers into a mason jar. "Now I think this is it, the soft things, the steady things." Alina smiled. "You've always had that in you?" A week later, a letter arrived, heavy cardstock, gold foil, official dotted, was from the Ohio State Board of Arts and Culture. Graham had been selected to design a new civic plaza in the capital, a place not only of government, but of gathering, space to honor voices often unheard. The committee cited his unique ability to build with empathy. He was given full creative license. The same day, he stood in his office, looking out at the city skyline, the letter trembling in his hand. And slowly an idea formed. A plaza of light, of movement, of legacy. A place not just to be seen, but to feel belonged to. That evening, Graham pulled out his sketchbook and began to draw. But instead of starting with columns or concrete, he began with a story. At the center of the plaza, he envisioned a sculpture, not a grand monument, but a life-sized figure. A seamstress seated at a table, stitching a garment, her face focused, gentle, wise. Around her, smaller figures, children running, a man holding blueprints, a woman reading on a bench, not statues. Stories, and etched into the edge of the plaza, circling the space like a thread pulled through fabric, would be one simple inscription: "To those who built quietly, we remember." He showed the design to Alina the next morning. She didn't speak at first, just traced the lines with her fingertips. "That's me," she whispered. "It's all of you," he said. "My mother, your grandmother, Isla, the women who taught me what beauty looks like when no one's clapping. I want them to see themselves in stone, not just in memory." Her eyes glistened. "They will." Construction took a year. Yes. And on a clear spring day, as flags flapped in the breeze, and citizens from every corner of the state gathered in the new plaza, Graham stood before the podium and told the story of a little boy in a tailor's shop with a measuring tape and a dream, of how he learned that the most lasting structures were the ones built not of steel, but of compassion, not to impress, but to welcome. Alina and the children stood nearby, Ela now tall enough to read the inscription aloud. Hope cooed in Elena's arms. Ezra and Rowan chased each other around the edge of the sculpture, and May stood solemnly beside. Her father, a notebook in hand, sketching. After the ceremony, Graham stepped back, watching strangers walk through the plaza, pausing, smiling, sitting quietly beside the seamstress statue. Alina joined him, slipping her hand into his. "You did it," she said. "No," he replied. "We did," she smiled. "So what now?" "Mr. Lark?" He looked out across the space, where laughter mingled with birdsong and footsteps. "Now," he said, "we just keep building." The sun rose differently on the day of the ribbon cutting at the new public library Graham had spent 2 years designing. Not because the light itself had changed, but because of what it revealed a plaza, alive with color, children's chalk, drawings spiraling across stone pathways, music floating through the air, and families walking hand in hand toward a building that looked less like a monument and more like an invitation. The library stood at the corner of 2 bus lines and a bike path, its curved glass walls reflecting the neighborhood that surrounded it: bakeries, churches, schools, lives in motion. The exterior shimmered with soft bronze panels, designed to catch the sunset like a flame, and along the sidewalk leading to the entrance, small plaques bore quotes from local children about what home meant to them. Graham stood just inside the main atrium, arms folded loosely as he watched the first wave of visitors arrive. A group of third graders ran excitedly past the check-in desk, gasping at the story tunnel, a winding hallway where projectors cast animated books on the ceiling like constellations. A grandmother guided her grandson to the adult literacy corner, their fingers brushing the same spine on a shelf. A young man in paint-stained jeans pulled out a sketch pad and sat cross-legged in the courtyard. "This," Graham whispered to himself, "is why we build." Behind him, Isla Now 10 walked up beside him, her hair tied back in a ribbon and her backpack slung with books, not toys. "Daddy," she said, "they put your name on the cornerstone." "I know," he replied. She pointed to the far end of the atrium, where a plaque rested in the wall. Graham Lark, architect, designed with joy. "Built for belonging." Isla tilted her head. "That sounds like you." He smiled. "Sounds like us." Elena arrived minutes later, Hope bouncing on her hip and May in tow, holding a clipboard filled with library notes. The twins had already escaped to the reading lounge, lured by beanbags and a Lego castle exhibit. "I still can't believe this is real," Elena said, adjusting Hope's sweater. "It's not just real," Graham said, pulling her into a one-armed hug. "It's permanent." He didn't mean the concrete, or the polished wood tables, or the green roof that filtered rainwater and kept the building cool. He meant what people would feel when they walked through the door, what children would carry into adulthood, what memories would be tied invisibly to the spaces they felt safe in that night. Long after the ribbon had been cut and the news crews had packed up, Graham and Alina sat together on their porch, legs stretched, fingers loosely entwined. The kids were asleep, the dishes done, the world just for a moment quiet. "I've been thinking," he said. "Always a good sign," Elena replied, teasing. "Do you remember the first time I walked into your shop?" "Of course," she said. "You looked like someone trying not to fall in love with the wallpaper." He chuckled. "I think I fell in love with you the moment Isla asked if I was a prince." Elena's expression softened. "And now, I'm still trying to be worthy of the crown." She reached out and touched his cheek. "You were never chasing perfection, Graham. You were chasing meaning, and somehow, you gave it to all of us." There was a long pause. "I have one more surprise," he said, standing and disappearing inside. When he returned, he held a slim leather journal, wrapped in a ribbon of indigo silk. Alina took it gently and untied the ribbon. Inside were sketches, not of buildings, but of people. Her, laughing, Hila, sleeping on his chest. The twins, Midrasel, painting under the tree. Hope, tiny and curled in a swaddle, her eyes just beginning to open, and on the last page, a sketch of Alina at her sewing table bathed in morning light, her hands mid-stitch, a cup of tea by her side. Underneath he'd written, "Where beauty lives forever." Alina closed the journal, her throat tight. "This is your masterpiece," she said. He shook his head. "You're my masterpiece." They sat in silence after that, but it was the kind of silence that hums with completion, not absence. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. The house grew louder, then quieter again. Years later, when Isla went off to college to study urban design, she left a note on the kitchen table. "Dad, I want to build places where people feel like I did loved, safe, inspired. Thank you for showing me how." The library remained. The plaza remained. The fifth window remained, and so did the feeling anchored in every space. Graham touched that beauty wasn't about symmetry or grandeur. It was about warmth. It was about memory. It was about creating something that whispered, "You belong here." One morning, much later in life, Graham stood once again at the kitchen sink, looking through the fifth window. Lena was out in the garden, May visiting with her firstborn, the twins fixing a bike in the driveway. Hope practiced violin upstairs, a little off-key but full of heart. He thought about the boy with the measuring tape, the man with the dream. The family they built, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Alina stepped inside, brushing dirt from her gloves. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He turned to her and smiled. "That I've lived inside the most beautiful thing I've ever built. If you've made it this far, thank you. Truly." Stories like this aren't just about architecture or love, they're about the quiet, everyday moments that build a life worth living. We'd love to know where are you watching from, whether it's a small town, a big city, or somewhere in between. Share your corner of the world with us in the comments. It's always a joy to see how far these stories travel. And if this story touched your heart, even just a little, please consider subscribing to Heartlight Stories. This channel is all about warmth, reflection, and the beauty of human connection. We'd be honored to have you as part of our growing community. From our heart to yours, thank you for watching. Take gentle care, and we'll see you in the next story.